And a very happy Monday to you at 12:07 in the West. It's the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wang has the week off. He'll be back with us on Monday. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number. 1-800-222-5222. Hope everyone had a wonderful weekend. And today we woke up to big news here in the world of California politics. Don't know if you saw this, but the New York Post Media Group, which of course owns the New York Post newspaper, which is owned by Fox News, Fox Business, that Fox, they will launch a new venture in 2026 called the California Post. The California Post will offer readers a, quote, unique and indispensable combination of fearless common sense journalism, celebrity and entertainment news, world-class sports reporting, and the legendary covers people expect from the New York Post, but from a distinctly California perspective. All of this according to the announcement. Los Angeles and California surely need a daily dose of the Post and an antidote to the jaundiced, jaded journalism that has sadly proliferated. We're at a pivotal moment for the city and state, and there is no doubt that the Post will play a crucial role in engaging and enlightening the readers, who are starved for serious reporting and puckish wit. This according to News Corp Chief Executive Robert Thompson in a statement. According to reports, this newspaper will bring the spirit of what we've come to know and love from the New York Post to the state of California, something we haven't seen before. The big city newspapers in California all want to be the New York Times, whether it be the LA Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Sacramento Bee. That is the model. And that's how we ended up with the dump that we live in today. And when I look at this as someone who has worked in the newspaper industry, that's my second job in addition to radio. I write a newspaper column for the Southern California News Group, which is the LA Daily News, the OC Register, the Riverside Press Enterprise, and most importantly, the Redlands Daily Fax. There's a couple of different issues here at play. First is the issue that all newspapers have to deal with, which is it's really, really, really tough to make a buck as a newspaper in modern society. You go back to the role that newspapers used to serve in the United States, that role many moons ago is very different than the role that they play today. Think about it for a second. Before we had the internet, before we had smartphones, before we had computers, if you wanted to know what was going on in the world, if you wanted to know how a stock you owned did, if you wanted to know what used cars were for sale in your community, if you wanted to know if the Angels won or lost the night before, well, you don't need to look to the newspaper to figure that out, but you get the idea. What time's the movie started? What was your horoscope? What is the weather going to be? All of that information was only available in one place. That was the newspaper. Well, I guess you could do television and radio, but if you wanted something in print in your house that you could reference whenever it was that you needed to look something up, the newspaper served the role as the internet. It was the internet before the internet. If you controlled the newspaper, you controlled the internet in that community. That's how it worked. And when that was the case, all of these families, the Chandlers and the Salzburgers and the Bancrofts, they had the ability to mint money. They were the Jeff Bezoses and Mark Zuckerbergs and Elon Musks of their day. They controlled the most technologically advanced material at the time, and they had monopolies on it. You owned your own territory, you controlled a city, that city was yours. You needed information in that city, they had to go through you. You wanted to advertise your product in that city, You had to go through the newspaper's advertising department. That's how it worked. And those people made gobs and gobs and gobs of money. Well, when the internet came along and suddenly you no longer needed the newspaper to find out what time the movie started or whether or not your team won or lost or how your stock did, suddenly newspapers became a lot less valuable. And then when eBay and Amazon and all of those websites, Craigslist, came along, the classified section went away. The classified section represented a huge percentage of the income for those newspapers, and that just disappeared, and it's not coming back. Ever since the internet became big, newspapers have lost control of the market share. Their subscribers have gone down. The engagement with the community has gone down. The number of people who read the articles has gone down. And it's just a question of how far have they gone down? How much of your audience have you hemorrhaged? Now, that's just the business aspect of it. When you look at the content of what these newspapers are putting out, we know that political bias is as strong now as it's ever been, in part because people who are interested in journalism and politics are usually liberal. If you're a conservative or a Republican, you typically want to go in some industry that will produce you money, where you can become wealthy, where you can own land, where you can enjoy all of the perks that wealthy people enjoy. And usually that doesn't come with working in journalism or politics, unless you're Nancy Pelosi, and then you're much better than Bernie Madoff, excuse me, and the rest of them. So a lot of people decided they would stop reading the newspaper because the newspaper became one-sided. It became politically biased. And those people who would prefer to be subscribers to the newspaper, opted out for that reason. Those people you can do something about. Those people you can bring back if you provide a little balance in the news. The people who used to rely on the newspaper for things that are now readily available and more up to date on their iPhone, I don't think those people are coming back. Those people have been lost for a very long time. And those people are now raising their kids without having the newspaper on the breakfast table every morning. So the kids see their parents reading the newspaper and say to themselves, okay, that's what adults do. That's what I want to do when I grow up. Not only are those people gone, but their kids and their kids' kids are gone. But the people who left because of political bias, that's people you can bring back into the store. Those are people you can bring back into the store. And I think the New York Post understands that. In a declining industry, the customers that are salvageable are customers that are disgusted with the product due to political bias. And if there is any place on planet Earth that needs a tabloid newspaper to bring those people back into the store, it's the state of California. Because not only is our news in California biased, it's also boring. They don't have fun with it. The thing about storytelling, which is what newspapers do, is that storytelling is essentially heroes and villains. It's like Grimm's fairy tales. It's what you read, the stories you read when you were a child. It's pro wrestling. It is reality TV. It's superhero movies. Good guys and bad guys. And you love to cheer on the good guys and you love to boo the bad guys. And what the newspapers do right now with their Trump derangement syndrome is it's just piling on the usual suspects every single day in a humorless way. It's part of the reason why late night TV is also failing. They don't understand how boring and predictable they have become. What the New York Post does better than anyone else, maybe the British tabloids are better, and they have some of them in Australia too, is they do heroes and villains like everyone else, but oh boy, do they have fun with it. They have fun with it. And when they find someone who they can turn into a cartoon character and they put them on the cover of that newspaper on a daily basis, the sky is the limit in terms of the fun that you can have. Think about all the people that we report on a daily basis on this program who the newspapers either just ignore or paint in a very serious light. Let's take the fake doctor Barbara Ferrer, for example. When she is referenced in the LA Times, they reference her as someone who is a public servant doing the best she can to keep Los Angeles healthy. And she has impeccable academic credentials. She is revered by the members of the Board of Supervisors. She is a pillar of the community, and her judgment shouldn't be questioned. Because if you question her judgment, you're questioning science. Can you imagine what a New York Post would do to her? Can you imagine the fun that they would have with the cartoon caricatures of her? Can you imagine how different COVID-19 would have been if they just skewered her and sliced and diced her like a piece of chicken at Benihana's every single day? Can you imagine how that would have changed public perception of Barbara Ferrer? I think it would have been different. How about Shang Tao up in Oakland? You saw how she was covered when she was first elected. She was crooked when she was first put into that office, and everyone knows it. She was hanging out with all the shady people when she was on the council. She was in bed with all of the ethically questionable people. Yet, no one talked about any of that. No one talked about the fact that this woman was also barely literate. Every single interview that she did was crash and burn. She couldn't explain basic things like the sale of the Coliseum. Yet the coverage of her was, well, she's the first Hmong mayor of Oakland, California. This is something that should be celebrated. She was once homeless. She was once a single mom. How fantastic is this? She came from the political machine that has produced some of the great democratic minds of the world. There was no talk about anything semi-related to reality with her, let alone having fun with her. That just didn't happen. That just didn't exist. Imagine what the New York Post would do with Shang Tao if they covered her on a daily basis. Oh my God. I'd subscribe just for that. How about Cecily Myart Cruz, the woman who runs UTLA, the teachers union that represents the teachers in Los Angeles? Every single press conference that woman gives is dialogue that could be in a Disney movie for the evil queen. Every time she opens her mouth. Yet you look about how she's portrayed in the media. Well, she's a woman who is certainly at the top of her game in the classroom and is a labor organizer like the town has never seen before. She's right up there with Jimmy Hoffa. And now she's in charge of the teachers union that represents the teachers in Los Angeles. Who knows? Maybe she'll run CTA. Maybe she'll go national. She is a respected member of the community. And they don't talk about the record. They don't talk about the product that the LAUSD system is producing and the failure, the daily failure that we all see in front of our own eyes. That's all ignored. And they treat her as if she is someone belonging on Mount Rushmore. If we had a New York Post in California, she might be on the cover more than Shang and Barbara Ferrer combined. And what happens when you do this is the newspaper, I don't think, will make money. So let me go on the record saying that. If you think you're going to get rich making a newspaper in today's day and age, I don't see how that happens. Maybe I'm missing something. I don't know. But you can change the dialogue. You can change the perception. You can change the framing of all of these issues and all of these people. Part of the reason that California is a one-party state is because all of the news that we get is filtered through the LA Times or the Sacramento Bee or the San Francisco Chronicle. And all of those newspapers are to the left of where the Democratic Party in California is. So the electorate ends up somewhere in between the newspapers and the Democratic Party. There is no way to fix this state unless you have the ability to pump out news that doesn't come from that perspective in a way that is readily available for the masses. I think if there is a California Post and they do what they say they're going to do, and they have fun with all of these people and all of their records, we could be looking at a different political climate in the state. Because right now, we don't have that. And unfortunately, even though a lot of these papers are failing in terms of making money, they punch above their weight. The LA Times does a story. It's covered on public radio. It's covered on KNX. It's covered in other places that reach the masses. You throw a New York Post-style newspaper into the equation, and suddenly you could start to move the needle. So here's my question to you right now at 800-222-5222, 1-800-222-5222. If the state of California got a conservative tabloid newspaper, do you think they'd sell copies? I do, and I think they might even change the politics of the state. What say you at 800-222-5222, 1-800-222-5222? Your calls coming up right here on The John Phillips Show. It's The John Phillips Show. If you want to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. The New York Post says in 2026, they're going to open up a newspaper in California, the California Post, a right-of-center tabloid. Do you think it'll work? I think it just might. 800-222-5222, 1-800-222-5222 is the number. Your calls up next right here on The John Phillips Show. It's The John Phillips Show. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. If you think the New York Post-style newspaper that's now coming to the state of California, the California Post, will work, I'm cautiously optimistic. And before we get to calls, I want to elaborate on something because I think it's an important point to make. Despite the fact that newspapers, print newspapers, are currently in decline, the big city newspapers, and I think in New Orleans and Seattle, they don't even have 7-day-a-week service. I think they only print the newspaper a few days a week, and the rest of the time it's just available online. Here is one of the reasons why newspapers are still so important. Even though fewer people are reading them, the important people, and by important people, I mean people who are movers and shakers and are influencers in their own social networks, still pay attention to the newspapers. What do I mean by that? Well, a friend of mine is a former assistant U.S. attorney, and we were talking one time about how his office and other offices finds people to prosecute. And my question basically was, do you surveil a large portion of the population, and do you obtain information from that surveillance that you then use to prosecute people with? And the answer was no. The answer was, we don't have that kind of manpower. We don't have that kind of technology. We don't have that kind of ability. That's not what we did. What we did was we would monitor the newspapers on a daily basis, and when the newspapers would write about something fishy, that would catch our attention. Because what we would be looking for is we would be looking for big fish that would create a lot of attention. If you go after someone who's a famous person, who's a politician, who is an athlete, who's a mover and shaker in town, and you find that they're doing something illegal and you're the one that collects their scalp, that's a career maker for you. If you get the mob boss in your city, if you get the corrupt politician in your city, if you get the priest that's molesting the kids in your city, whatever the case may be, that's something that will go in your obit when you die. And so he said what the prosecutors would do is they would scan the newspaper on a daily basis, and when they would find that someone was up to no good, and there was already public reporting, and there was already a public allegation that existed, they would then start to look into it. They followed the headlines. They didn't make the headlines. And the headlines that they were following were from the big city newspaper where their office was. If you control that big city newspaper and you control which people they do investigative pieces on and which people they do critical and negative reporting on, you control what the prosecutors are looking at. So even though you might be losing money, even though you might not be selling classified time, even though you might not be selling ads to the big Hollywood companies promoting their movies, you still have the power to get people thrown in prison due to your reporting. That's where the spark started, in the newspaper. Take a look at what radio stations cover and what television stations cover. It used to be, back in the old days, that if you were a radio station in Los Angeles, a news station, KNX or KFWB, whatever the case may be, you had a bureau at LA City Hall. Alex Sullivan was our guy at KNX when I worked there. And you had a bureau at the state capitol in Sacramento. And you had a bureau in Washington, D.C. covering the national news. And you had all of these people in all of these bureaus that were keeping an eye on what was going on and reporting proprietary information back to you. The television stations all did the same thing. They went away pre-Arnold. When Arnold became governor and we had a celebrity governor and suddenly everyone was interested in the news again, they reopened their bureaus in Sacramento. But the minute Arnold left, they shut them down. Budget cuts. Now, what do all of these stations do? They look at what's in the newspaper and they cover essentially what the LA Times is covering. If you are the Los Angeles Times, not only do you get to decide what's on the front page of your newspaper, but you decide what public radio is going to be leading with. You decide what KNX is going to be leading with. You decide what the local news channels on television are going to be leading with. They don't have the personnel to go out and do their own reporting. So they take the LA Times' coverage and they put their own spin on it and they put it on their airwaves. That's how that works. So if you run the LA Times, you're also determining what all of the other shops in town are covering. If it seems like there's a pack mentality when you watch the news, regardless of which channel you're watching, you're not going crazy. That's true. But the leader of the pack is the big city newspaper. It doesn't just work that way in Los Angeles. It works that way all over the country. It's part of the reason that there's still value in these newspapers. Why else would all of these rich people who have done a very good job at making money in their life even bother buying these papers? Think about who's buying these papers at this point. Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post. You had Rupert Murdoch, who bought the Wall Street Journal. You had Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, who bought the LA Times. Why would you buy something that's hemorrhaging money that has no prospects of making money? Because of the power that comes with it. if you control that newspaper, if you control that organ, you become one of the most powerful people in town. And when you decide to go in a different direction, generally speaking, that town goes in a different direction too. Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong is trying to do that right now at the LA Times. He has said publicly that he does not want that paper to be a partisan left-wing rag, that he wants them to be down the middle and show both sides to every story. He doesn't want to alienate Republicans. Well, he's having a very difficult time putting that product out because the personnel that he has, they're used to doing it a different way, and they've done it a different way for many, many, many years. In fact, when he first bought the paper and his daughter was calling the shots, she told them to go even further to the left and to find racial angles in every story, including stories about farm futures and things that had nothing to do with race. They became obsessed. And part of the fallout from that is they lost whatever conservative or Republican readers they had left. And now that he's saying that he wants them to go back to the middle, they're hemorrhaging people on the left. By starting a new newspaper in town, you can hire the people who will produce the product that you're looking for. So maybe, just maybe, what happens with the California Post is they produce the product that Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong wanted to produce but can't. And by the way, if he actually wants the LA Times to do what he said they're going to do, he's probably going to have to find different personnel because they're going to hate it and they're going to go kicking and screaming the entire way through, and they're not going to produce the product that he wants. He's going to have to find people who are capable of producing that product, which means he's going to have a massive turnover over there. But that's the attraction to these billionaires. That's why they want these newspapers. That's why at 90 whatever years of age, Rupert Murdoch is now talking about starting a new newspaper in California. He's not doing it because he thinks he's going to make money. He's doing it because he wants to change the politics of the state. And God love him for doing it, because we certainly need it. Newspapers, which again used to make money, are now essentially akin to owning a sports team. If you've ever looked at the economics of owning a sports team, it's awful. Unless you're the Yankees or the Lakers or a handful of teams. What happens is you buy the team, you hemorrhage money the entire time you own the team, but you are a man about town while you're the owner. You get invited to all the cool parties. You're treated as if you're a celebrity. You get to be shown on ESPN in the owner's box whenever your team makes the national network. If you make it to the playoffs or you make it to the world championship, you get to sit on the float of the parade holding the trophy as they go by. It's a whole lot of fun. It's a toy for billionaires, and it's a toy that they really enjoy. But it's a costly toy because those teams not only lose money, they hemorrhage money. Oddly enough, you know who made money the whole time he owned the team? Was Donald Sterling with the Clippers. I guess if you don't pay anyone anything, you can make money. And if you're fine losing, you can make money. And that team made money the entire time he owned it. Where the professional sports teams go in a different direction from the big city newspapers is when you sell them. With the professional sports teams, you hemorrhage money the entire time you sell them, but when you sell them for billions of dollars. The value of a company that loses money goes up over time exponentially. And you make all the money back that you spent when you sell the team. The difference with the newspapers is when you sell the newspapers, you lose your shirt. You hemorrhage money the entire time you own it, and when you sell it, you lose your shirt. Which leads me back to my original point. The reason that you buy one of these newspapers is for the power that comes with it. The ability to shape the narrative and to present the stories in ways that the public digests. The political power that comes with owning those newspapers is immense. There was a book called The Man Who Owns the News, written by Michael Wolff, who's a tabloid journalist himself, and it was about Rupert Murdoch's purchase of the Wall Street Journal. And Rupert Murdoch purchased the Wall Street Journal only because he couldn't purchase the New York Times. But his goal in life, from when he started in the newspaper business in Australia, was to own the New York Times. That was the goal. And everything else that he does, whether it be the Fox News Channel, Fox Business, Fox Television, 20th Century Fox, Fox Searchlight, whatever, the whole point of all of those other properties is to make money so he could buy more newspapers. And the reason that he wants to own more newspapers is he wants to own more influence. That's why the book was called The Man Who Owns the News. You own the newspapers, you own the distribution of information, you own the flow of information. And if there's anything that can change the political climate in California, it's to change the flow of information, change the distribution of information. Because right now, the people who wrecked everything still have a monopoly. It's part of the reason why you can go out and say the bullet train is a success and people believe it. Because if that's what's printed, that's what people believe. You can go out and say crime is actually down. And it may feel like crime is up, but that's not true. Crime is actually down. If the newspaper goes out and prints that crime is down, people will believe you. It doesn't matter how ridiculous your claim is. If you're validated by the big city newspaper that then gets repeated everywhere else, your lie will stick. And people telling the truth will be regarded as conspiracy theorists and people who are spreading misinformation. The only way to combat this is to go out and have another big city newspaper that puts out an alternative narrative. And if that alternative narrative happens to be the truth, even better. But we need an alternative narrative here because right now we don't have it. And because we don't have it, we're all suffering. Do you think a California Post will work? 800-222-5222, 1-800-222-5222. Your calls coming up right here on The John Phillips Show. It's The John Phillips Show. 800-222-5222 is telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. Let's go to Ray in L.A. Ray, hello.
Hello?
Yes, sir. You're on the air.
Okay, I just want to make a comment about the comments that are written on the side of the L.A. Times building. They all emphasize the importance of newspapers, and even Thomas Jefferson advised people to read newspapers and complimented newspapers. And I would also like to suggest a newspaper called Change Links. Our newspaper is a progressive, free-thinking paper, and we distribute it free. And you might want to make some comments on that.
All right. Never read it, but thanks for the plug. Let's go to John in San Jose. John, hello.
Hi, John. Great show. Thanks for taking my call. Up here in the Bay Area, we've got, as you know, the San Francisco Chronicle and the San Jose Mercury News. And I, for one, and many other family and friends have done this, gave up subscriptions to those papers many, many years ago because of their far left bias. They continue to not only bash everything Trump, but if you even go back in history, the San Jose Mercury News pushed gun control all the time, all the way through the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. They constantly belittled every Republican at the national and the state level. I seem to remember particularly Meg Whitman when she ran against Jerry Brown. There was not a day that went by in the full month leading up to the election that both the San Jose Mercury and the San Francisco Chronicle did not do a hit piece on Meg Whitman in favor of Jerry Brown. It was way over the top.
Oh, yeah. And, of course, during the recall election, the L.A. Times went in full propaganda mode against Larry Elder, where they called him the black face of white supremacy, and they just hit him over and over and over again. And I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't have 10 Republican subscribers left after that pathetic performance. But unfortunately, this is what we have in the state as of now, and maybe Rupert Murdoch will change that. Thank you for the call.
Let's
go to
hope
Klaus in Thousand Oaks. Klaus, hello. You got about 30 seconds.
Hey, John, I really think a California Post would be very successful in this state because unlike the West Coast, the East Coast has the New York, God forbid, the New York Post is used by a wide variety of other media groups like Cumulus, Westwood One, Salem, all kinds of folks. And it's entertaining, it's interesting. And I think on the topic of
well, we're out of time, but thank you for the call. I appreciate it. I think we got the point. The Fix California Hour is next. Don't you go anywhere.